Good afternoon and happy Friday, everyone. I am Dr. Tanya Robertson, the chair of the Far South Chicago Coalition's Health and Mental Wellness Committee, and your host for our Friday Health Talk of the Week. The Far South Chicago Coalition is comprised of caring community leaders, business owners, and engaged residents just working together to make a change and to create a thriving community. With your help, the Far South Chicago Coalition has created 6 key focus areas that we have used to create the Far South Chicago Quality of Life plan. We are one band, one sound, and we deserve the best. Welcome to our show today entitled March is National Nutrition Month. Let thy food be thy medicine, said Hippocrates a long, long time ago, but this sentiment still rings true. National Nutrition Month, celebrated in March, stresses the importance of a balanced diet, eating in variety and moderation, and exercise. The Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics promotes the transformation of power of food, healthy food choices. So now I'll turn it over to our moderator, Mr. Ted Williams III, who will introduce our great guest.
Thank you so much. Somebody just knocked my camera out, so I'm gonna do this whole show in the dark. I'm so joking. I would not do that, but y'all need to see me anyway. You need to see there we go. You need to see our guests. But I'm gonna go ahead and actually play a video about him, and then we're gonna come back, and maybe, just maybe, I might actually have a camera working when we come back. So we're gonna go ahead and watch this because I think that what he is doing is so phenomenal, and it's better for you to just sort of see it before we even discuss it. So here we.
I was inspired to become a gastroenterologist primarily because I had a family member who had a polyp, a precancerous growth that was removed by a gastroenterologist. So when I found out about that when I was in high school, that piqued my interest in medicine and subsequently gastroenterology. I'm primarily interested in helping people out with nutritional issues. So those issues can range from people who are trying to lose weight to people who have lost too much weight and now they're trying to figure out ways to gain weight back. I view myself as a physician, as a teacher, a listener, a problem solver, a shared decision maker, and a collaborator. And I work together with my patients to really solve some of the issues that they're going through. One of my favorite tips is to really try to eat real food. mostly plants and not too much. And that tip was inspired by the author Michael Pollan. I'm also a trained chef, so people come to see me to not only talk about nutrition, but also how to cook food and how food plays a role in their everyday life and everyday health for that matter.
Well, all right. I am super excited here. You know what's going on, folks? I tell you, I guess I'm just not supposed to be seen today. So, and that's okay. Sometimes you have to see. We'll go ahead and we'll figure this thing out. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. I got a camera issue. I'm not supposed to be seen today. I guess what it is, but I'm going to go ahead and figure this out and I'll fix. Here we go. Let me just see here real quickly. Let me try one last thing here. I know what to do. 1 second. Sorry. Okay. And let's see where I am. 1 second, 1 second, 1 second. Okay. Let's see if we got in now. Okay. Just talk for 1 second. Let me figure this thing out here. I do apologize, but I need to introduce our guest. Actually, what I can do is I can introduce our guest, but I will go ahead and while I don't have a camera, maybe I can introduce our guest without a camera. How about that? And this is so funny. I literally was just in. Let me step out. Dr. Roberson is gone too. So there we go. Okay, there we go. Let's see here. All right. Okay, everyone. I welcome you guys to the Far South Chicago Coalition's Friday Health Talk. Can you hear me? Dr. McDonald, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, fantastic. I'm going to actually just introduce you. This is kind of like, it's going to be like your own show now. Like, like you don't even need me anymore. I'm going to introduce you, and then I'm going to kind of hop back in here in just 1 second.
Okay.
And so there we go. All right, here we go. Yahoo! Okay, we are all here, and we are ready to go. Thank you so much for joining us. Everyone, this is Dr. Edwin McDonald. And Dr. Edwin K. McDonald IV, MD, which is actually the fourth is very important. I'm a third myself, and my son is a fourth. So that's actually very important. I'd love to hear about the legacy there with the Edwin McDonalds. I'm sure he'll tell us about that a little bit. But Dr. McDonald is dedicated to improving the health of individuals and communities through nutrition education. He works with patients with small bowel diseases, obesity, and other conditions affecting the digestive system. Dr. McDonald's interest in the effects of nutrition on health and disease stem from his experience with Project Brotherhood, an innovative clinic dedicated to providing accessible, affordable care for Black men on Chicago's South Side. While training barbers to serve as health educators, he became keenly aware of the impact of social determinants of health, including the role of nutrition. In 2012, Dr. McDonald received a certificate in professional cookery from Kendall College School of Culinary Arts. Dr. McDonald is also an active researcher. He recently investigated the effects of vitamin deficiency in patients requiring paternal nutrition, intravenous feeding, and studied the usefulness of fecal calprotectin with patients with inflammatory bowel disease. He also created a web-based mobile program. I apologize.
We don't have to do the whole.
You know what?
Bio.
I know you probably are like, don't read the whole bio. I'm actually doing the whole bio because you're the only one here. So normally, like, we have all these guests and I'll give them like one line, but this is your show today, bro. So I'm giving you a full, like, everything, your government name. I'm doing it all. I got 3 more sentences to go, so I'm going to get through. I probably botched a couple words in there, but I'm going to get through this because you deserve this. People need to know who we're talking to today. So he created a web-based mobile program to assess the utility of applications in managing patients. And his work has been funded by the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases. Everyone, please welcome Dr. McDonald. See, that wasn't too bad, right? You're
great.
like me, sir. People do that to me. I'm like, please don't read the whole thing. But I get it. But I'm really happy to have you here. And we're spending the entire hour with you because you have some really, really important things to talk about in terms of medicine, in terms of nutrition and health. So why don't we pick this up from your initial conversation that you were having in the video around why you got into medicine in the first place and what you are hoping to do with your career. So why don't we start there?
Well, I got into medicine.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, well, I mean, I essentially got into medicine for a couple different reasons. I mean, I grew up here in the Chicago area, and growing up, especially going to churches, I would see people sick and shut in with various diseases. And I felt like my medical education started as a youth when I started hearing about all these diseases that people actually were suffering from. For instance, I didn't learn anything about diabetes from school, in elementary school, but I learned about diabetes from people who actually had diabetes. You go to church and you see someone missing a limb, ask a question like, man, what happened to such and such leg? Oh, they had diabetes. They had to get it cut off. And, I grew up in the generation where we still had encyclopedias and stuff laying around. So I would go to the encyclopedia and start looking this stuff up because I don't want to get my leg cut off. And that's how I initially got introduced to medicine. But then I also realized that there's a connection between food and disease, because most of the times when I asked about what these conditions were, especially diabetes, people would say, well, I would definitely ask, why did people get diabetes? And oftentimes people would refer them to the foods that they were eating. And for me, I was like, well, I actually want to go to med school to learn about how to help people eat better, so they don't necessarily get diabetes and some of these other chronic diseases. And in medical school, I didn't learn any of that. Like, nutrition education is actually not a part of, at least wasn't a part of the curriculum when I went. And there's progress to make it more a larger component within the current day curriculum, but we still have a little bit ways to go. But when I went to medical school, I just kind of had to, learn some of the stuff on my own, and to the point where I even got inspired to go to culinary school. So I went to culinary school and became trained as a chef. Other reasons I went into medicine, as you mentioned, I'm a fourth. So my great grandfather, who I bear his name, was a physician. And so he came up from the South, from Alabama, in 1918, I believe. And, he was the son of a slave. So he was born in the 1870s, and came up from the South, and son of a slave, and went to medical school at Northwestern, where I actually subsequently, uh, 70 years later, would go to medical school myself. So hearing his stories, I mean, really just fascinating about Chicago at that time. Particularly because he was around during the Spanish flu pandemic. So when he went to medical school, simultaneously you had the Spanish flu going on, similar to our COVID-19 pandemic, but you also had racial unrest. So you had the Red Summer of 1918, 1919 or so, where there were a lot of different race riots all over the country, including Tulsa, Oklahoma, including here in Chicago, in which people were rioting in Bronzeville, and they burnt down, I believe like 200 to 500 houses in Bronzeville. So I would hear those stories about him being a physician or training during that time, and it would be fascinating because his experience is wrapped up with, not only the history of Chicago, but also the history of medicine. So he, one of his mentors was Daniel Hale Williams. And Daniel Hale Williams is a big name in the history of medicine, but also one of the first, Black physicians in the country. So having that connection to him and hearing some of those stories that were passed on to through the generations down to me, it definitely was my inspiration to kind of follow in his footsteps, so to speak.
That is such a fascinating story. I gotta camp out on that just for a moment. He was mentored by the Daniel Hale Williams.
Daniel Hale Williams.
Was it at Providence Heights Hospital? Was that what, if I remember correctly? Because he did that first open heart surgery right here in Chicago,
Yeah.
which I think is so powerful. And so you just
my great grandfather, he was a cardiologist at Providence.
Wow. That's awesome. That's what a great legacy. You prove this point that I make all the time. I went to school on the East Coast and moved back to Chicago. I'd lived in Indiana for many years. And when I moved to Chicago, I remember being fascinated by all the history that was here. And I remember wanting to be here because I was like, wow, man, this is where, this happened and that happened. And this is where this is going on right now, particularly as it relates to people of African descent. And I think that there's such a paradox that exists in our city. There's so much despair and there's so many challenges. And yet simultaneously, there is so much great history and there are so many things to be proud of and so many things to build off of from the city. I think we have to continue to see the glass as half full and not half empty, and really work to continue the legacy of the city, because there really, really is a great legacy, and you and your family are such an important part of that. So, how cool is that? So, anyway, so you go in, and so why did you choose the? Well, you mentioned kind of how you got into this from the church community and that sort of thing, but
Yeah.
I would imagine, so you saw this and you saw all of these issues in the community,
Yeah.
and many people could respond differently. They could go, well, okay, well, just, grandma needs to eat better or whatever. But when did you know that it was medicine that you were supposed to do in that way?
Yeah, I mean, probably, I would say in college, and I definitely, I was always interested in community outreach. Even when I was in college, I was a member of the Black Student Union. I went to University of Michigan, and at that time, there was the huge Supreme Court case around affirmative action. So there was a lot of activism on my campus, and I was one of the activists. And when I started thinking about, things that I can do for my community, like healthcare issues just kept coming up over and over again. And for me, being blessed to not only be in a position where I did have a family member who was a physician, a lot of people aren't blessed with those opportunities, and also blessed to have the opportunity to go to an excellent university and study science. I felt that I was in a position to, really be a service to my community through healthcare. And like, could I have gone on and did business and went to Wall Street and all that other stuff? Probably could have, but ultimately that would have just benefited me, not necessarily my surrounding community. Which, no disrespect to people who chose those options. I mean, those are definitely respectable careers, and you can help your community any way you want, even providing financial services. But for me, I thought providing dealing with the health of the community was one of my priorities. And even when I thought about like the Black Power movement of the 60s and 70s and the civil rights movement, and even a lot of those leaders, I mean, some of those leaders, they died from heart attacks. Like, you put in all this effort to elevate, our people, so to speak, but then you die from a heart attack and die from food related conditions. And even I remember growing up here when Harold Washington died. I remember holding my grandmother's hand as she was crying when the news broke out. Literally watching Channel 9 or something like that, that Harold Washington passed away. So, for me growing up at that time, Harold Washington was huge. I mean, that was a big deal when he was mayor. But to find out that he not only had an unhealthy diet, but died from a heart attack, that just added more fuel to the fire, because it demonstrated to me that regardless of how successful you are, everyone still can fall victim to the same thing, and that's eating poorly. And that's what I saw pretty much throughout my entire childhood. And I even had to make my own personal changes in order to live a life that I think was just healthier for me as a Black male.
I would love to hear about some of those personal changes as well, because I think they're very conversations like this are very accessible, right? So we can talk medicine and we can talk about sort of what you do, but I'm interested in sort of that personal connection, which I think is so critical. Dr. King said, of all the forms of inequality, injustice in healthcare is the most shocking and inhumane. And I'm sure you're probably familiar with that quote, but I just think it's so interesting that you mentioned your desire to be involved in medicine came from the movement, came from the struggle, came from really the legacy of what had been fought for, so that people like you and I could go to school and that sort of thing. And that's such a powerful manifestation of those things. I myself went to school and studied public policy and do that kind of work. But I am so impressed that there's someone here that goes, yes, and healthcare is just as important. As Dr. King said, gosh, the worst of all injustices here. So why don't you tell us, we're going to fast forward into kind of what you do on a daily basis now. Then I want to come back and talk about your own personal sort of choices and health and that sort of thing. So what do you do? What is your average patient dealing with? What kinds of things are you dealing with on a day-to-day basis in your work that might be of interest to us?
Yeah, so my work is really diverse at the end of the day. So, I mean, fundamentally, I'm a gastroenterologist. So I do procedures, including colonoscopy, upper endoscopy, and this is primarily to diagnose and treat issues with the gastrointestinal tract. So, March is colon cancer awareness month. I'm the person doing colonoscopies. And the purpose of colonoscopy is not purely to diagnose colon cancer, it's mostly to prevent colon cancer. And one of the ways we do that is by identifying polyps, which are small growths that in some people over years can turn into a cancer. So with the colonoscopy, I can identify them, but I also can remove them so they never have the opportunity to become a colon cancer. So in many ways, if I'm doing a procedure, say I'm someone who's like 35 years old who came in with some rectal bleeding, and we find a massive polyp and I take it out and there's no cancer in there, like that person, their life was just saved by the colonoscopy. Um, so I feel good to be in a position to do stuff like that, so people won't have to deal with ending up with colon cancer and potentially having surgery or potentially even worse, losing their life. Um, and as a gastroenterologist, I also deal with emergencies. Okay, so sometimes people can have bleeding ulcers and bleeding within the stomach, the esophagus, the small intestine, the colon, and those episodes of bleeding can be life-threatening in some people. So I'm in a position where I have to use my cameras to go in, identify what's bleeding, and stop it. So literally, someone won't pass away. So it ranges as a gastroenterologist. Some of what I do ranges from prevention to also, preventing life-threatening situations from occurring. I also, as the associate director of adult nutrition, am involved with nutrition. Um, so I have kind of a malnutrition clinic, and it's really a clinic for a sick population of people who have cancer that has impacted their bowels to the point where they can't really eat. So we have to think about ways to provide nutrition when the intestines really aren't working, where you really just can't eat on your own because either you've had surgery or the cancer is blocking your bowels. Simultaneously, I have to see a lot of patients who are gunshot victims who have abdominal trauma, where maybe you've had penetrating abdominal trauma to your intestines and you can't eat. So now we have to figure out ways to provide nutrition in order to get people out of hospital. And unfortunately, in Chicago, that has become a part of my practice, unfortunately, especially being on the south side of Chicago. And that's something that's a whole separate conversation in terms of trauma. But as a gastroenterologist, at least in my subspecialty, I deal with a decent amount of trauma. And then I also have people who have eating disorders and a lot of psychiatric issues. And so what I do not only is focusing on nutrition, but overlaps with psychiatry tremendously. And then I have my regular general GI clinic, which I help people with constipation, with acid reflux, with irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's disease, and a lot of the common gastrointestinal conditions that are out there. We actually spend more money on gastrointestinal conditions than we do cardiovascular disease and diabetes. Because so many people have gastrointestinal complaints. And oftentimes those complaints are linked to some of the other chronic conditions that we have, but also the foods that we're eating. And then I started a weight management clinic. So I also have our weight management clinic at the University of Chicago, where we help people lose weight. But for me, my emphasis isn't really on the number in terms of what the scale says. Okay, my emphasis is really on getting people to live a healthier lifestyle, which not only includes adjusting and modifying their eating patterns and the foods they're eating, but also increasing physical activity. And I oftentimes emphasize to my patients that this is not just about losing weight and looking good and, going on Instagram and social media and posting your pics and whatnot. It's about one, trying to live a lifestyle that's associated with decreased risk of chronic diseases, including cardiovascular disease, stroke, diabetes, etc. But it's also about being a healthier example for our family and for our community. Because a lot of my patients, they tell me they never saw their parents exercising, they never saw their parents eating out. Um, these behaviors that they never saw, the studies have demonstrated that once we adopt those behaviors, our children can benefit from them and we can pass those on. So, a lot of times people say like, oh, diabetes is genetic and high blood pressure is genetic. Well, there's a component of it that's not necessarily genetic. It's just that we're passing on the same unhealthy behaviors. And if, grandma has this unhealthy behavior, the daughter has it, and then the granddaughter has it or the grandson, like, it's the behaviors that are being passed on, not just the genes. And I think there's opportunities to pass on healthier behaviors. So one of the reasons why I started a clinic was to have that conversation. And in terms of another reason why I started a clinic is because I, developed my own weight issues to the point where I probably lost about 100 pounds or so. And in order for me to do that, I didn't have any information from medical school that I could draw upon. You would think, medical school, you learn like how not to gain weight, how not to lose weight. I mean, and how to lose it. But that wasn't part of my medical school curriculum. So once I started reading more in the medical literature about those topics and also navigating those issues myself, I felt obligated to do the same for my community and patients. And that's why I started the clinic.
Why don't you tell us a little more about your own personal journey as you shared? I think that's a very good point, because I really believe that, people need to see something, right? See an example so they can actually live it and be it, as you mentioned, with families and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I hate to do this. I always name drop when I have the UFC doctors on.
Okay.
My aunt, I'm very proud of her. She's a doctor at UFC also, and
Who's your aunt?
Shelley Williams is her name.
Oh yeah, I love Shelley.
Yeah,
Shelley's great.
yeah, she is.
My favorite geriatrics doctor.
Yes, sir. She's ours as well, and she takes care of all of our family whenever we're, going through stuff. So she's wonderful. So please, make the connection. But I know that she's kind of even in our family has, gone through her own sort of nutrition journey and really kind of helping us to kind of deal with that, and, always brings the healthy food to the parties and things like that. And so I think even as doctors, you guys struggle with these things as well and have to figure them out for yourselves. And where were you and how did you come to that realization, and what did you do to sort of move yourself in the right direction? And then what was the impact on your health?
Yeah. So let me go back a little bit. So, first and foremost, I've always enjoyed food and cooking. And I was raised by wonderful matriarchs from the South who taught me the joy of cooking at an early age. I mean, I was probably 10 years old or so, and I'm making dinner for the family.
Hmm.
It's a whole different generation. And I was like a latchkey kid where you come home and there's nobody around. And,
Yeah.
back when you can do things like that. And as a result, I had to learn how to put stuff together. And it may have started with like, okay, let me just make myself a sandwich. But then it's just like, well, let me make this a fancy sandwich,
Mm.
And then, you graduate from making a sandwich to let me make my own hamburger. Okay. You start off making the frozen patties. Like, well, let me, just take my own ground meat and make my own patties and season it up. And then let me make a fancy hamburger. And then it's just like, well, if I can make a hamburger, I can make spaghetti. And then, and the rest is history. And eventually I started working at McDonald's. I actually became a manager at McDonald's when I was around 16. And I noticed that there were families that would come in every single day and just eat McDonald's. Like I see them at dinner sometimes in the morning for breakfast. And I'm like, this is crazy. Like, why are you guys eating McDonald's all the time? So I actually started making stuff that was off menu for some of those families, which, I'm a 16-year-old manager. One, you shouldn't make a 16-year-old manager of anything, but they messed around and made me the manager. So my McDonald's had a secret menu.
Wow.
So folks
Wow.
coming in getting omelets and frittatas and
Wow.
yeah, like all this.
That's a story I've never heard. And my father was in the McDonald's business for a number of years. He had 2 franchises, and so he went to Hamburger U. I know how serious they are about, what you're supposed to be doing with their stuff. And
They're right. So I mean, I had no business being a manager other than I wasn't stealing and I, didn't do drugs, anything like that. The bar was real low at that time.
Wow, that's awesome. That's a great story.
But for me, when I was feeding the families and even a bunch of police officers would come in and ask for food off the secret menu, like I witnessed the power of food. But I'm also working at McDonald's, so I'm also eating some of that food, on break. And I gained a little bit of weight then, not too much, because I was playing high school sports, and so like any weight that I gain and whatnot, like I'll burn it off during football practice and tennis practice and some of the other sports that I played. But fast forward to college, was working out in college, didn't really gain weight. As a matter of fact, I actually was one of those people who thought I couldn't gain weight. So even when I played football, I was always just trying to get bigger, and it just would never happen. Like, I couldn't even crack 160 if I tried when I was in high school. Like, I'm like, oh man, I just need to get to 160 and I'll be the best running back. So fast forward to medical school, I'm still relatively slim, but then I didn't start gaining weight until when I became a resident. So I got married and we had our first kid, and I started working the crazy hours that the residents had to work, where you're working 100 hours a week. And in the hospital, you're eating junk food all times of the day and everything. And I'm simultaneously adjusting to being married, to having a kid, and being a resident. And the stress and lifestyle change associated with all that just made some of those comfort foods a little bit more comforting. And next thing you know, I started gaining weight. And simultaneously, being a newlywed, I used to just go to the gym all the time and just kind of focus on myself. But I had all these new responsibilities where that got pushed to the wayside. So I ended up focusing on, my family members, my patients, my kid, sacrificing sleep. And that was a recipe for weight gain. And it came on super duper fast. Like I remember looking in the mirror one day, like I used to have a 6-pack, but I don't have a 6-pack anymore, but I still look good. And then, a month later, you're like, man, like this kind of semi 6-pack is now a belly.
Yeah, right.
And you look up, it's just like you hop on the scale, like, wow. Not only have I broken 160, I've broken, 185. And then you look up, like, not only did I break that, I broke 200. And so on and so forth. And I actually one day checked my blood pressure when I was in the hospital, and my blood pressure was a little bit higher. And I was, probably in my 30s at that time. And I was just like, you know what? I've seen where this path leads. Let me go ahead and do something different. And I really started focusing on nutrition, switched over to primarily a plant-based diet, and, lost a bunch of weight. But once you gain weight, you still got to work at keeping it off. So my body always wants to go back to that higher weight. So I have to actively put in work. And, the weight loss journey, or even the staying healthy journey, none of this stuff is easy, because we live in a culture that promotes unhealthy eating and unhealthy and really a sedentary lifestyle. Okay, because you can go on Netflix and all these different shows and watch TV 24 hours a day and be entertained. I mean, there's good shows out there. And you can eat a lot of the fast food and never really have to cook for yourself, and food will be accessible. But although that lifestyle is easy, it doesn't make it healthy. And unfortunately, that's the lifestyle that we are gravitating towards. And it's also the lifestyle that's being marketed to us. So I don't even want to blame the victim, but we do have to take a step back and think about, well, how can we take control of our health as
Yeah.
opposed to just being, a passive participant in our health
Yeah.
and letting marketing corporations and, other powers kind of dictate how healthy we are. And for me, especially as a Black man, looking at the literature that demonstrates that Black men, we have the lowest life expectancy of any group in America. And even when you correct for violence and, all that stuff, like that bothers me. It really bothers me because that one, it doesn't have to be the case. Two, when you think about some of the civil rights leaders of the past, people that I've read books about when I was younger and that I have a great deal of respect for, like I feel like they didn't struggle. They didn't struggle for this. You know what I mean? Like they didn't struggle for us to just succumb at an earlier age. It's just like you fight so long for freedom and then you die from, health issues. Like to me, that bothers me. And I think, although the struggle continues, it's a struggle that's easier if we're healthy.
That's a great point. What a great connection to this legacy and this history. And so I thank you for that. It is so important. And I thank you for sharing your own journey. I want to come to a comment, and often, let people know if they're watching, they can throw comments in. But do you see community health decline? Have you seen a greater level of health decline nutritionally during COVID? I'd like to hear that. But then I also want to know, because you kind of really teed up us for this part of the conversation,
Mhm.
what is that connection clearly between what people are eating and what you're seeing on the other side in your work? And then we're going to get into your cooking and that sort of thing later. But I'd like to talk about the connection between nutrition and health. And then also if there was, you saw a decrease in nutrition, particularly during the COVID season.
Yeah. So in terms of connection between nutrition and health, it's a clearly well-established connection between what we eat and how healthy we are. There was a good study that was in JAMA a couple years back that looked at risk factors for mortality. Okay, so they looked at 17 risk factors, including unhealthy diet, having a body weight above average or what's expected for someone. Also looking at having high cholesterol, high blood pressure, not wearing seat belts. Like multiple smoking cigarettes, etc. So the risk factor that was the number one determinant for dying early out of all these determinants was the foods that we ate, was having an unhealthy diet. So that had a stronger impact on our overall mortality than cigarettes. Not that I'm an advocate for, telling people to smoke cigarettes. Cigarettes are definitely not good for you, but it just shows how powerful the foods that we eat are when it comes to our health or lack thereof. So as far as COVID, COVID did have an impact on nutrition for a bunch of different reasons. I mean, initially, a lot of people were hesitant to go to grocery stores. And then there were supply chain issues, and those issues are still going on. And then, simultaneously, even here in Chicago, there was some racial unrest. And I remember there was a point where some of the local grocery stores were closed down for a week or two because they were looted. And that limits access to areas where they already had limited access. So, and then with COVID, COVID is been an emotional time, and a lot of times people are just stuck in their houses. They can't really do the things that they would normally do. So food becomes again a tool that we can use for comfort to some degree. Food and alcohol. So alcohol use has increased exponentially to the point where we've even noticed the numbers of liver transplants that we're doing at the University of Chicago for alcohol has increased exponentially during the COVID era. And I think a
Wow.
lot of it has to do with dealing with the stress and emotions of everything that's going on. It is not easy, especially when mental health support is something that a lot of us do not have access to for a lot of different reasons. So I would say definitely COVID has impacted uh, the foods that we're eating, but it's also impacted our lifestyle in general. So I've seen in my weight management clinic people who were once successful at losing weight now started to gain some of the weight back, and some of it has to do with the gyms were closed for a little bit, and a lot of people still may have a little bit of discomfort going to the gym because a lot of people don't want to get COVID. So that is it's a real concern, but we still have to figure out ways to stay healthy because it's one thing to avoid COVID, but also put yourself at risk for a heart attack.
Right, right. That is so powerful. You made two statements in your conversation today. One just recently, and one earlier in the conversation about, you mentioned gun violence and the issues, the intestinal issues that people are dealing with, which you would not even think of that as sort of a secondary issue for people to have to wrestle with, and you in your work dealing with that. You also just mentioned this idea that you've seen liver issues rise exponentially. I hope we caught that, and they've risen exponentially in the last 2 years because of people being at home and using alcohol as comfort, and so these are really, really critical issues. And so I thank you for bringing our attention to them. Why don't you talk a little about your current work outside of medicine? So you're a chef.
Yep.
And I think that's a really cool connection. I know that you probably get a lot of attention and that sort of thing for being a chef and a doctor at the same time. And why don't you talk about the intersection of those two worlds and what you're trying to do and why you're doing it and what we can learn from that work?
Yeah. So one of the reasons why I decided to go to culinary school, I mean, it was really inspired by patients. I remember years ago when I was an intern, I was working at the VA hospital, Jesse Brown VA, and I took over a clinic from a previous doctor who subsequently finished residency. And I was, seeing some of his patients for the first time. And there was one guy, he was a Vietnam veteran, and this is, the vets were much younger at that point. So I think he might have been in his 50s or so. This was, almost 20 years ago. But he was a Vietnam veteran, and he just got divorced. So he had diabetes, he had high blood pressure, had a mild stroke, but he was still pretty functional. And his wife left him because he had erectile dysfunction. And I'm like, man, that's cold-blooded. That's like you're dealing with these health issues, and she was just out the door. And I asked him one of the most powerful questions I feel a physician can ask a patient, especially in lieu of the evidence that we know food is connected to mortality. I asked him, like, what do you eat? And nobody asked him that before I asked him that question. There was no doctor note that documented what the man was eating. He never saw a dietitian or anything like that. And the brothers just said hot dogs. So he was from that generation of men that never really learned how to cook because of gender roles. So his family members only taught the women how to cook, and he was just expected to find a partner who knew how to cook, and that's what he was looking for. And once he got divorced, he couldn't cook for himself, so he was just boiling hot dogs every day, pretty much for every meal. And I told him, like, man, like, you are not going to live long at all on a hot dog diet. So I gave him a recipe for how to roast vegetables. I wrote it down on a napkin in the VA hospital. I'm like, yeah, man, just put your oven on 425, grab some broccoli, chop it up, throw a little some olive oil on there, a little bit of salt and pepper, not too much because you got high blood pressure, but just enough to add a little bit of flavor to it. Put it in the oven, roast it 15, 20 minutes, let it get a little bit of char, not too much, not too much. You don't want to burn it, but you want it to taste good. And he started doing that. So he went from eating hot dogs every day to eating broccoli every day. And I looked up, his blood pressure got better. His diabetes got better. I was able to get him off of a lot of his medications. And not only that, he became an advocate for other brothers at the VA to do the same. So I will go down to the cafeteria. And I don't know if you've ever been to a VA hospital, but the cafeteria, folks are hanging out at the cafeteria. Like the VA hospital really, for a lot of folks, is an opportunity for socialization, especially Black men, because we have the highest rates of social isolation, especially as we get over the age of 60 or so, which is that's a whole separate conversation. But a lot of the brothers there, they would go to the VA and hang out in the cafeteria. And I saw him, giving recipes and telling other guys to eat some broccoli. I'm like, man, I got to come up with more recipes because me helping this one guy allowed him to become a catalyst to help some of his peers. And I thought it was amazing. So eventually I went on to go to culinary school and do a fellowship in clinical nutrition go to culinary school and do the clinical nutrition fellowship at the University of Chicago. And in the evenings, I was a culinary student, it was a whole separate experience. I'm working these crazy hours in the hospital, leaving the hospital, going straight to the culinary school. I think culinary school was from like 7:30 to 11 p.m. 3 days a week. And I still had to pay for it. So I had to moonlight, work extra shifts just to make money to pay my tuition. It was a crazy experience. I even interned for the Food Network that year. I was one of the chefs on Sandwich King season 3.
Wow.
Yeah, so if you go back and watch that whole season, like all those sandwiches that Jeff Morrow, who's the host of the show, was showing and how to make and everything, like I made those sandwiches.
That's awesome. That is awesome. That's awesome. So I guess I have 2 questions, and we're going to land this plane here in a second, but where are you going with this in your work? Where are you going, and what are you hoping to accomplish as you go forward? And then I would love for you to have a word for our community.
Yeah.
To really help give some practical tips, some inspiration, some direction on the things that you've learned on your journey.
So, I'm working with a bunch of chefs. We do cooking classes, and for years I was doing cooking classes in the hospital, at least, pre-pandemic. And we've been doing a lot of virtual cooking classes and stuff like that. But, some of my goals are really just to inspire people to return to cooking and also return to cooking healthier foods as opposed to relying on processed foods. So for the average American, regardless if you're black or white, 60% of our calories come from ultra processed foods. Ultra processed foods, by definition, are foods that contain industrialized ingredients. So it's not even real food to some degree. But that is what we're eating for the most part. And those foods not only can increase our weight and not only put us at risk for diabetes, but they also can impact our mortality. So I am trying to provide nutrition and culinary education to help give people the skill set where they're not relying on those processed foods. And then also, I'm trying to inspire more Black men to get in the kitchen and cook for themselves. Because, like, ultimately, we have the lowest life expectancy, and we also have the highest rates of social isolation, where in our older years, we have the highest likelihood of being alone and being by ourselves, or we're isolated. And if we're not set up to cook for ourselves and take care of ourselves, then that's just a setup for early mortality to some degree. And oftentimes when we're allowing people to cook for us, either significant others or restaurants, we're giving up some of that control to some degree. And I want to put people in a position where they actually can have more control of their health and also more knowledge of health decisions. And I've seen situations where I've had patients who have high blood pressure or who are also trying to lose weight. And I'm like, well, you have to modify your diet. And their response, well, my wife cooks all the food and she doesn't want to do anything different. So, I guess I'm just going to be stuck here with my blood pressure. And to me, that is sad. And the flip side, I've seen women come in where, they're trying to lose weight and trying to make healthier stuff, but their male partner is demanding that they cook, fried foods and all this unhealthy stuff. And to me, that's also sad. And I think to address those situations, it really takes broadening the conversation about nutrition, cooking, and healthy cooking, and really making that more accessible, because it used to be accessible. I mean, again, I was raised by matriarchs who loved cooking. But in today's era where, everyone's so busy, we have other stuff to do, I feel like that joy of cooking is being lost. And now cooking is really just seen as a burden amongst people. But ultimately, it's one of the ways we can control our health. And when you look at the data, I mean, it's no coincidence that America, we have the highest rates of chronic diseases for the most part. Because, you know, when you look at data, so say in 2014, that was the first time um, Americans ate dinner out almost more so just as much as they ate dinner at home. So back in 1984, 75% of the dinners that the average American ate was at home. In 2014, that number dropped down to like 50%. Okay. And in 2010, that was the first time that households in general spent more money on foods at restaurants and fast food than groceries.
Wow. You've taken us all around the world on this question, and the question of the connection between nutrition and health, and it is such an important connection. We've had a few shows on this topic. I don't think we could have too many, because as Dr. Robeson has really led the charge in getting guests and figuring out what we're going to talk about, many of the diseases that we talk about on the back end could be prevented and with on the front end with good nutrition. So
they definitely can be prevented, and it's, you know, it's one of the reasons why I emphasize that we have to not only focus on this as adults, and it's also not too late. Okay, I don't want people to have this nihilistic mentality, like, oh, I've been eating like this all my life, like I'm not going to change anything. It's too late. It's not too late. A lot of the stuff can be reversed, but it is easier to establish healthy eating habits at an early age. And it's one of the reasons why when I hear people say, oh, you know, this person's young, they can eat whatever they want, it's not true. Never been true. That is one of the biggest lies that I've ever heard that has been put out there. So a lot of, and it's not true for a lot of different reasons. One, childhood obesity is out there. I mean, that is a thing. And childhood diabetes is also a thing. But even if kids are eating some of these foods and they're not necessarily gaining weight, they are developing taste preferences for a pattern of eating that is going to be unhealthy and put weight on them as adults. So I don't think, you know, encouraging our kids to establish these preferences for unhealthy foods at a healthy age is going to be the thing that's going to lower the life expectancy for not only Black men, but also Black women. And also white people. Like white people, like Asians and Latinos have higher life expectancies than white folks. So a lot of times we're trying to talk about these health disparities, comparing us, Black people and white people. It's like the average American has, room for improvement, especially when you're comparing our white population to the white population of European countries. Like we are not doing as well.
That's an excellent point. Excellent point. So I guess in closing, what do you want the audience to know? I mean, and I'll say this just so I can make a personal connection here. I really enjoy these discussions. They're not only edifying for me as a community member who wants to help make a difference, but they're personally edifying as well, because it reminds me of my own life and what I need to be doing with my family and my own health and that sort of thing. So if someone's watching today and they're overwhelmed by this, unfamiliar with this, not sure where to start,
Yeah.
what do you say to them?
So start with small changes that you can do. Okay. So, I've seen some people like, hey, I just want to be a vegan. And you go from being a barbecue type of person every single day to being a vegan. Like that's a rough transition. Okay. That is a 180-degree turn. And I don't know if that is the best thing to do for everyone. So start small. And I typically in my weight management clinic, I tell people start with what you're snacking on and what you're drinking and some of the liquid calories, because most of those ultra processed foods are really coming from the form of snacks. Okay. So, if you're drinking pop and juice with every meal, that is an easy way to eliminate some extra sugar, which can have a profound impact on, decreasing your risk of diabetes, or if you already have diabetes, your control of your blood sugar. And starting with the drinks and even with the alcohol, a lot of times people think, oh, it's white liquor, dark liquor, and all it like all that stuff has calories, regardless if it's white or black. And drinking too much of it can have a profound impact on our weight and also cancer risk. So I'm not saying don't ever drink alcohol. Moderate intake is reasonable, but if you're doing a fifth every single day, like that's a problem. Or clearing a six pack. And I've had plenty of patients like, oh yeah, the Bulls game come on, I'll get a six pack and we watch the whole game. Like you don't have to drink the whole six pack. Like, that's probably not ideal. And looking at snacks, so even my weight gain story, snacks were the culprit. So it wasn't that the overall quality of my diet was terrible. It was really that I would come home after a hard day's work and sit down with some tortilla chips and some salsa and just go to town. And those are calorie dense food. So you don't really have to eat a lot of those foods in order to get a lot of calories. So the potato chips, the tortilla chips, and all those snacks, that is a place where if you cut back and or eliminate those and replace them with like fresh vegetables, you can make a substantial change in your health. And I went from, dipping tortilla chips, which, those are basically a fried food. So I was doing fried foods every day, even though I wasn't frying chicken and all that stuff every day. I still was eating fried foods every day, and I just didn't even realize it. So once I got rid of that and I started, dipping baby carrots and salsa, the weight just started coming off. And I wasn't doing a whole lot. But what I realized when I actually started counting up my calories, like I substantially decreased the amount of calories that I took in. And I started eating more vegetables in general. Whereas before, if I made dinner, if I was busy, like just making a steak by itself and just eating steak, I didn't have to have any sides. The protein was the whole meal. And that was not, or if I just made some white rice or something like that, or some potatoes, that just was not the way to go. So I started emphasizing the vegetables and emphasizing the meat less. And then it went from like, well, instead of having a smaller portion of meat, do I even need meat? Let me do some beans instead of meat. And let me do this a couple days of the week. So I went from, doing meat every day to, barely doing meat, it's just barely ever doing it. I may do it for holidays and stuff like that. Or, my wife wants to go to a steakhouse. Like I'll make exceptions every now and again. But, for the most part, I'm functionally a vegan vegetarian.
That's wonderful. You heard it here, folks. Dr. McDonald has given us some great wisdom, and now it's time for us to go and do something with it. I just really thank you so much for everything that you shared from a medical perspective, from a lifestyle perspective, from a male perspective, from the perspective of a person of color. All of these things are so just critical, and I'm grateful. This has been a very rich conversation, and I know for a fact that there are folks out there who, if they hang on to any of these nuggets that you dropped today, it could be life changing. Dr. Roberson, what do you think about our guest today? We had a really good time, and
yes, excellent. Thank you so much for everything that you shared. Our community definitely needs it.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Dr. McDonald, where can they find you in terms of your public work where they could come and support or engage or learn from you?
Yeah. So I have a website, thedockskitchen.com.
I love it.
Yeah, so just check out thedockskitchen.com. You can find me on Instagram at thedockskitchen4. And then I also have a kid's book on Amazon that talks about digestion. So it's really for a younger crowd, but it's Do You Know Where My Food Goes? And it's really about it's a Black father explaining to his kids about digestion, and has all these little cool pictures and whatnot. And for me, my rationale behind the book, it starts early. Okay.
Yes.
I've seen a lot of adults deal with a lot of serious issues by not have any, because they never had any understanding of their gastrointestinal tract. So I want to be put out of business. Okay, like I know that sounds crazy. Like I want to get to the point where I could just go open a restaurant where like they don't need me to do colonoscopies all the time. They don't need me to help with everybody's constipation because people are doing it themselves, and like I'm okay with that. Like my student loans, they're not paid off yet, but they will be paid off. But once those loans are paid off, put me out of business. If everyone's too healthy and they don't need me, that is a win. So that's one of the reasons why I made the book to, really get kids interested in, gastroenterology and nutrition and digestion. Because honestly, I didn't even know what a gastroenterologist was until, I took a family member to get their colonoscopy, and even still, like I didn't really quite get it then. I'm like, they put a camera where? Like, why? Why would you do that? And I really didn't have a firm understanding until I actually went to medical school.
Okay.
Wow. Thank you so much. And we've got a comment about how this book is a recommendation about this book. Do you know where my food comes, or where my food goes? Excuse me. I actually would like to check it out. So thank you so much for sharing that. Dr. Roberson?
She said it comes highly recommended by her 5 and 1 year old children. Okay, that's
exactly
good.
Which
right. And I was here taking notes because a lot of things you were saying, the Far South Chicago Coalition, we're having a Black Men's Cook-Off during the summer, and we do a lot of things with Chicago Public Schools. So we'll keep you posted.
Okay. Yeah, I'd love to get involved with that. And the literature shows that Black men, we're actually cooking less than other groups. And like that's something that bothers me. Okay. It bothers me because I know what our life expectancy is, and I know what cooking could do for us.
Yeah.
But we just have to get that message out there.
Cool. Thank you, brother. Just thank you
All
so
right.
much. It was fantastic. Dr. Roberson, it is on you. What a great session. Thank you for bringing on Dr. McDonald. And
thank you.
It's all on you.
Okay. Well, that concludes our Friday Health Talk of the Week. I'd like to thank our guest, Dr. Edwin K. McDonald IV, who is definitely dedicated to improving the health of individuals and communities through nutrition education, and for his rich conversation that is much needed to improve the health of our community. We will definitely have to have you back. And listeners, remember, self-advocacy is key. And it's never too late to start eating healthy. Just take small steps. We want to hear from you always. We want to invite all of our guests to contact the Far South Chicago Coalition. If you've been influenced by our show or have any comments, please call us, visit us, visit our Facebook Live page, like us, comment about this Facebook Live, and we want to hear from you on any requests of any show topics that you would like to learn more about. The Health and Mental Wellness Committee of the Far South Chicago Coalition is spearheaded by our president, Dr. Joyce Chapman. The show was directed and content was produced by me, Dr. Tanya Roberson, and a job well done by our moderator, Mr. Ted Williams III. We look forward to seeing you all next Friday. Have a great weekend.